The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal towers of Zephyr City. High above the ground, elegant beings floated through the air like living clouds. Their bodies glowed with soft blue light as they moved between the tall buildings. These were the Zephyrians, and flying was as natural to them as walking was to humans. But not all Zephyrians could fly. Kex pressed his face against the cool crystal wall and watched the others glide past. His bioelectric organs, the special parts that should have let him float, had never worked. While other young Zephyrians his age soared through the sky, Kex could only crawl along the ground. His arms had grown strong from years of pulling himself around, but his legs remained weak and useless. The public data terminal hung 20 feet above the ground. Kex stared up at it, feeling the familiar weight of disappointment in his chest. He had important research to do for his studies, but the terminal might as well have been on another planet. Other Zephyrians floated up to it easily, their fingers dancing across the crystal interface as they accessed the Galactic Information Network. Kex tried jumping, but his feet barely left the ground. He looked around for something to climb, but the smooth crystal walls offered no grip. The nearest ladder was in the government district, a long crawl away. By the time he got there and back, the library would be closed. A group of young Zephyrians floated nearby, their laughter ringing through the air like music. Kex recognized them from his old school, before his parents had given up trying to find a place that could accommodate him. They were discussing their latest assignments, comparing notes about stellar navigation and quantum mathematics, subjects that Kex excelled at but could no longer study properly without access to the data terminals. "Look, it's the crawler," one of them said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Still trying to reach things that aren't meant for him." The others giggled, their bioelectric fields flickering with amusement. Kex felt his face grow hot with shame. He had heard worse names than Crawler over the years, but the word still stung. He turned away and began the slow journey back to his family's dwelling on the ground level. The Galactic Council research station sat at the edge of Zephyr City like a metal flower among crystal trees. Unlike the Zephyrian buildings, it had ramps and platforms at different levels to accommodate the many species that worked there. Kex often came here to watch the alien researchers, fascinated by their different forms of movement. Some walked on 2 legs, others on 4 or 6. Some slithered, and a few even rolled. None of them seemed ashamed of how they moved. Dr. Sarah Chen was reviewing atmospheric readings when she first saw the young Zephyrian. She had been on Kepler 442b for 3 months, studying the unique crystal formations that made up the planet's surface. The Zephyrians were a fascinating species, but they kept mostly to themselves. This was the first time she had seen one of their children near the research station. The boy was different from the other Zephyrians she had observed. While they floated gracefully through the air, this one moved along the ground using his arms. His bioelectric organs flickered weakly, producing only tiny sparks instead of the steady glow that allowed flight. Sarah watched as he struggled to reach a public information terminal that hung in the air. "Interesting," Sarah murmured to herself. In her 3 months on this planet, she had never seen a Zephyrian who couldn't fly. She had assumed it was a universal trait of their species, like humans having 2 arms and 2 legs. The boy tried jumping again, his face twisted with frustration. Other Zephyrians floated past him without stopping to help. Some even seemed to move away deliberately, as if he carried some kind of disease. Sarah felt a familiar anger rise in her chest. She had seen this kind of treatment before, during her childhood on Earth when her younger brother Marcus had used a wheelchair. Without thinking, Sarah walked over to the struggling boy. She was tall for a human, nearly 6 feet, and the terminal was just within her reach. "Need some help?" she asked in the universal trade language. Kex looked up in surprise. He had never been this close to an alien before. The human was strange-looking, with pale skin and hair the color of autumn leaves. She wore the blue uniform of the Galactic Council research team. Her eyes were kind, but Kex had learned to be suspicious of kindness from strangers. "I can reach it for you," Sarah said, gesturing toward the terminal. "What do you need to access?" Kex hesitated. In Zephyrian culture, accepting help with basic tasks was seen as admitting weakness. But he needed those research files for his mathematics project, and no one else had ever offered to help him. "The Stellar Cartography Database," he said quietly, in accented but clear trade language. "Section 7, subsection 12. Sarah reached up and activated the terminal. The crystal interface came to life, displaying streams of data about nearby star systems. "Stellar cartography?" That's pretty advanced stuff. Are you a student? I study on my own now, Kex replied, his eyes fixed on the scrolling information. The schools here are not made for beings like me. Sarah felt that familiar anger again. Beings like you? Flightless ones, ground crawlers, the cursed. Kex spoke the words matter-of-factly, as if they were simple statements about the weather. That's ridiculous, Sarah said, surprising herself with her bluntness. On my world, we believe that everyone deserves equal access to education, regardless of their physical abilities. Kex stared at her in amazement. The idea that someone might consider his disability irrelevant to his worth was completely foreign to him. Among his people, the ability to fly was everything. It determined where you could live, what jobs you could have, even whom you could marry. Those who couldn't fly were considered evolutionary mistakes, burdens on society. Your world sounds very different from mine, Kex said softly. Different doesn't always mean wrong, Sarah replied. She watched as Kex absorbed the stellar data with impressive speed, his eyes moving across the complex calculations and orbital mechanics like he was reading a simple story. You understand all that? Mathematics has always been easy for me, Kex said with a small shrug. Numbers make sense. They don't care if you can fly or not, Sarah smiled. She thought of her brother Marcus, who had become one of Earth's leading computer programmers despite being unable to walk. Numbers are honest that way. So are the stars. As Kex finished gathering his data, other Zephyrians began to notice the strange scene. A human was helping a crawler, treating him as if he were a normal person. Some floated closer to get a better look, their bioelectric fields pulsing with curiosity and disapproval. Thank you, Kex said as the terminal shut down. I have not had help like this before. Everyone needs help sometimes, Sarah said. Even those who can fly. As Kex began his slow journey home, Sarah watched him go. She thought about the casual cruelty she had witnessed, the way an entire society had written off one of their own simply because he was different. It reminded her of humanity's own dark history, the times when they had done the same thing to their disabled, their minorities, their poor. But it also reminded her why she loved being human. Humans at their best had learned to see strength in diversity, value in difference. They had learned that a person's worth wasn't measured by their physical abilities, but by their character, their intelligence, their capacity for growth. Sarah made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Tomorrow she would find the young Zephyrian again. She had a feeling that his understanding of mathematics and stellar navigation could be very useful to the research station, and perhaps in return, she could show him that being different didn't mean being worthless. The twin moons rose over Zephyr City as night fell. In the crystal towers above, Zephyrians settled into their floating sleep chambers. On the ground below, Kex lay on his simple bed thinking about the strange human who had helped him without asking for anything in return. For the first time in his life, someone had treated him like his thoughts mattered more than his legs. It was a feeling he wanted to experience again. Sarah found Kex 3 days later at the same data terminal. This time he wasn't alone. 2 adult Zephyrians floated nearby, their bioelectric fields pulsing with agitation. They were speaking rapidly in their native language, but their body language was clear enough. They were angry. There is no need for outside interference, one of them was saying in broken trade language as Sarah approached. The boy knows his place. His place? Sarah asked, stepping between them and Kex. And where exactly is that? The Zephyrians exchanged glances. The larger one, whose ceremonial markings suggested he held some kind of official position, spoke carefully. The flightless have their own areas, their own purposes. It is not proper for him to use facilities meant for the elevated. Sarah felt her temper rising, but she kept her voice calm. The terminal is public access. I checked the regulations myself. Regulations made by off-worlders who do not understand our ways, the official replied. His bioelectric field flickered with dismissal. We appreciate the Galactic Council's presence here, but internal matters remain internal. This isn't an internal matter, Sarah said firmly. It's a matter of basic rights. The 2 Zephyrians floated higher, using their elevation as a display of dominance. But Sarah had dealt with bullies before, both human and alien. She stood her ground and looked directly at Kex. Do you want to access this terminal? Kex glanced nervously between Sarah and the officials. Speaking up would mean trouble, possibly serious trouble. But something in the human's steady gaze gave him courage. Yes, he said quietly. I do. Sarah reached up and activated the terminal without another word. The officials hissed with displeasure but did not interfere. Creating a scene with a Galactic Council researcher would bring unwanted attention from their superiors. As the data flowed across the crystal display, Sarah noticed that Kex was working on something far more complex than basic stellar cartography. The equations filling the screen dealt with quantum mechanics and hyperspace theory, graduate-level material, possibly beyond. "This is your own research?" she asked, impressed. "I am trying to solve a navigation problem," Kex explained, his fingers moving quickly across the interface. "The current jump calculations assume perfect stellar positioning, but they do not account for gravitational microshifts over long distances." Sarah blinked. She had a doctorate in xenobiology and a minor in astrophysics, but the mathematics Kex was manipulating made her head spin. "How long have you been working on this?" 2 years, Kex said absently, lost in his calculations. "Ever since I read about the merchant vessel that was lost in the Proxima sector. The rescue teams searched for months, but they were looking in the wrong places. Their navigation computers didn't account for the triple star system's complex gravity well." That's brilliant," Sarah said, staring at the screen. "This could revolutionize long-range space travel." The two officials had floated away during the conversation, but Sarah could see others gathering in the distance. Word was spreading that the human researcher was actively helping the crawler. This would not go unnoticed by the Zephyrian authorities. "Kex," Sarah said carefully, "would you be interested in visiting our research station? We have better computers there and access to the full Galactic Council database." Kex's eyes widened. "The research station? But it is built for flyers. The platforms are too high." "We have species from 12 different worlds working there," Sarah said. "Trust me, we've figured out how to accommodate everyone." That wasn't entirely true. The research station had been designed with flying species in mind, since the Zephyrians were the dominant inhabitants of the planet. But Sarah was confident she could find a solution. The next morning, Kex waited nervously at the designated meeting spot outside the research station. He had barely slept, too excited by the possibility of accessing real research equipment. But as he looked up at the towering metal structure with its elevated platforms and floating walkways, doubt crept in. How could he possibly navigate such a place? Sarah arrived carrying what looked like a modified cargo platform. She had spent half the night in the engineering bay, working with tools and spare parts to create something that might work. The device looked crude but functional, a flat surface equipped with small repulsor engines salvaged from a maintenance drone. "It's not pretty," Sarah admitted, setting the platform down beside Kex, "but it should get you around the station." Kex stared at the improvised mobility device. Among his people, using artificial means to achieve flight was considered deeply shameful, an admission that one was defying natural order. But as he looked at Sarah's hopeful face, he realized that her people saw things differently. To them, tools were not signs of weakness, but expressions of intelligence and creativity. "How does it work?" he asked. Sarah showed him the simple controls. "These adjust altitude, these control direction. The power cell should last about 8 hours. Want to try it?" With trembling hands, Kex pulled himself onto the platform. Sarah helped him find a comfortable position and showed him how to operate the controls. Slowly, carefully, he rose into the air. For the first time in his life, Kex was flying. The sensation was indescribable. He had dreamed of this moment since childhood, but had never imagined it could feel so natural, so right. The platform responded to his touch like an extension of his own body. He rose higher, level with the station's main platforms, and for a moment forgot about everything except the joy of being airborne. "How does it feel?" Sarah called up to him. "Like freedom," Kex replied, his voice thick with emotion. Word of the humans' latest intervention spread quickly through Zephyr City. By afternoon, a formal delegation had arrived at the research station. The Zephyrian Council of Elders was not pleased. Elder Zix floated at the center of the delegation, his bioelectric field pulsing with authority. His ceremonial robes marked him as one of the most powerful beings on the planet. "Dr. Chen," he said formally, "we need to discuss your recent activities." Sarah had been expecting this conversation. She had prepared her arguments carefully, drawing on Galactic Council regulations and interspecies law. "Elder Zix, I assume this is about Kex? The individual you referred to is under the care and authority of Zephyrian society," Elder Zix replied. Your interference in our cultural practices is both inappropriate and unwelcome. Helping a sentient being access public information isn't interference, Sarah said calmly. It's basic decency. You do not understand our ways, another elder interjected. The flightless serve a purpose in our society. They remind us of what we have overcome, what we have evolved beyond. To elevate them artificially is to deny millions of years of natural selection. Sarah felt sick. She had heard similar arguments before, throughout human history. The idea that some people were naturally inferior, meant to serve as reminders of humanity's primitive past. It was the same logic that had justified slavery, genocide, and countless other atrocities. Natural selection also gave humans opposable thumbs and large brains. Sarah replied, Should we stop using tools because they're artificial? Should we abandon medicine because disease is natural? That is different, Elder Zik said, though he sounded less certain than before. Is it? We've spent the last hour watching Kex solve navigation problems that our best computers couldn't handle. His mind works differently because his body is different. That's not a weakness to overcome. It's a strength to celebrate. At that moment, Kex floated over on his platform, carrying a datapad covered with calculations. He had been working on the quantum navigation problem while Sarah met with the elders. His face was bright with excitement. Dr. Chen, he said, not noticing the tension in the air. I think I found the solution. The gravitational microshifts create a resonance pattern that we can predict and compensate for. Look at these equations. Sarah took the datapad and scanned the complex mathematics. Even with her limited understanding, she could see that Kex had made a breakthrough. The equations were elegant, sophisticated, and potentially revolutionary. Elder Zix floated closer, his curiosity overcoming his disapproval. Despite himself, he found his eyes drawn to the calculations. Like all Zephyrians, he had been educated in mathematics and stellar navigation. He could recognize genius when he saw it. This is remarkable, he admitted reluctantly. Kex has been working on this problem for 2 years, Sarah said, completely on his own with limited access to resources. Imagine what he could accomplish with proper support. The delegation exchanged uncertain glances. They had come prepared to demand that the humans stop interfering with their cultural practices. They had not expected to find the crawler producing work of such sophistication. We will consider this matter further, Elder Zix said finally. But understand, Dr. Chen, that our society has functioned successfully for thousands of years. Change comes slowly to us and for good reason. As the elders departed, Sarah turned to Kex. How are you feeling about all this? Kex looked down at his platform, then back at the research station where alien beings from a dozen worlds worked together in harmony. Scared, he admitted, but also hopeful. For the first time, I feel like my thoughts might matter more than my legs. They do matter, Sarah said firmly, and I'm going to make sure the galaxy knows it. That evening, as Kex practiced maneuvering his platform around the research station, Sarah sent a message to Galactic Council headquarters. She attached the response from Galactic Council headquarters arrived 3 weeks later, and it changed everything. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Council's chief science advisor, had personally reviewed Kex's navigation research. Her message was brief but stunning. The Council wanted to offer Kex a position as a consulting mathematician for an urgent rescue mission. The merchant vessel, Stellar Wind, had been missing for 6 months in the Vega sector. Traditional search patterns had failed to locate the ship, which carried 47 crew members from 6 different species. The rescue operation was being scaled back due to resource constraints, but Kex's breakthrough in quantum navigation theory offered new hope. Sarah found Kex in the research station's mathematics lab, surrounded by holographic displays showing complex orbital mechanics. He had been working non-stop since receiving the Council's offer, both excited and terrified by the opportunity. Any second thoughts? Sarah asked, settling into a chair beside him. Many, Kex admitted, his fingers dancing across the interface as he refined his calculations. What if I am wrong? What if my theories fail when applied to real rescue operations? 47 lives depend on my mathematics. 47 lives that have no hope without your mathematics, Sarah reminded him. The traditional search methods have already failed. You're their best chance. The door to the lab hissed open and Elder Zix floated in. Over the past 3 weeks, he had become an unexpected regular visitor to the research station. Despite his initial opposition to Sarah's interference, The elder had found himself increasingly curious about Kex's work. "The Council of Elders has reached a decision," he announced formally. "We will permit the boy to participate in this project. However, there are conditions." Sarah tensed. She had been expecting this moment, but that didn't make it any less nerve-wracking. "First," Elder Zix continued, "this is to be considered a single, isolated event. It does not represent any change in our society's fundamental structure or values." "Understood," Sarah said carefully. "Second, if the project fails, all artificial accommodations for the flightless will be discontinued. The boy will return to his proper place in society, and off-world interference will cease." Kex looked up from his calculations, his face pale but determined. "And if the project succeeds?" Elder Zix hesitated. The other elders had debated this possibility extensively, but they had been reluctant to make firm commitments. "If it succeeds, we will reconsider certain aspects of our social structure." It wasn't much, but it was more than Sarah had dared hope for. "Those terms are acceptable," she said. Over the next 2 days, Kex worked with the Galactic Council's rescue coordination team to implement his navigation theories. The process was intense and stressful. Every calculation had to be perfect, every variable accounted for. The traditional search grid had covered thousands of cubic light-years without success. Kex's approach was different. Instead of searching randomly, he used gravitational resonance patterns to predict where a disabled ship might drift over time. "The key is understanding that space is not empty," Kex explained to the rescue team during a strategy briefing. "Gravity wells, dark matter concentrations, solar winds, they all create currents and eddies that affect the movement of disabled vessels. A ship without power doesn't just stop where it breaks down. It follows these invisible currents like debris in a river." Captain Torres, the human officer leading the rescue operation, studied the three-dimensional projection that showed Kex's predicted drift patterns. "This assumes the ship's main engines failed completely. What if they had partial power? Then the drift pattern changes," Kex said, manipulating the display to show dozens of possible scenarios. "But the mathematics still work. We can calculate probability zones for different failure modes." Dr. Manath, an insectoid scientist from the Centauri system, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "The computational requirements are enormous. Our ship's computer will need several hours to process each scenario." "I can do the calculations faster," Kex said quietly. The rescue team exchanged glances. They were all accomplished scientists and officers, veterans of dozens of space rescue operations. The idea that a young alien could outperform their sophisticated computer systems seemed impossible. "How much faster?" Captain Torres asked. Kex considered the question. "Your computer needs 4 hours per scenario because it must check every variable independently. I can see the patterns directly. Give me 30 minutes per scenario." Sarah watched the team's skeptical expressions with amusement. She had seen Kex work with complex mathematics for weeks now. What seemed impossible to them was simply Tuesday afternoon for him. "Let's test it," Captain Torres decided. "Run Scenario 7 through both the computer and Kex simultaneously. We'll compare results." 28 minutes later, Kex announced his solution. The computer was still processing. When it finally finished, 3 hours and 43 minutes after starting, the results were identical. "Impossible," Dr. Manath muttered, checking and rechecking the data. "Not impossible," Sarah said with a smile. "Just different. Kex's brain processes mathematical relationships in ways that linear computers can't match. It's not better or worse than artificial intelligence. It's complementary." The rescue fleet launched 2 days later. 3 ships carrying emergency supplies, medical equipment, and enough personnel to handle a major evacuation. Kex accompanied them on the command vessel. His mobility platform adapted for zero-gravity operations. The search area was vast, nearly 100 cubic light-years of empty space, dotted with asteroid fields and cosmic debris. Using traditional methods, they could have searched for months without success. But Kex's calculations had narrowed the search to 12 high-probability zones. "First target zone in 3 hours," Captain Torres announced. "All teams prepare for detailed sensor sweeps." Kex floated beside the navigation station, constantly refining his calculations as new sensor data came in. The gravitational readings were more complex than his models had predicted, requiring real-time adjustments to the search patterns. "Zone 1 is negative," the sensor operator reported after 2 hours of intensive scanning. No metallic signatures, no energy readings. Adjusting for local gravitational variations, Keck said, his fingers flying over his interface. Try Zone 4 next. The magnetic field readings suggest a different drift pattern than I initially calculated. Zone 4 was also empty, so were Zones 7 and 9. Zone 12 is our next best option, Keck said, though Sarah could hear the worry in his voice. They had been searching for 14 hours, and the crew was beginning to show signs of fatigue. More importantly, fuel and supplies were limited. They couldn't search indefinitely. Entering Zone 12 now, the pilot announced. Kex stared at his calculations, double-checking every variable. The mathematics were solid, but mathematics couldn't account for every possible factor. What if the ship had exploded instead of drifting? What if his fundamental assumptions were wrong? Contact! The sensor operator suddenly shouted. Metallic signature bearing 27 Mark IV. It's big, Captain. Ship-sized. The main screen lit up with sensor data as they approached the source of the reading. A battered merchant vessel tumbled slowly through space, its hull scarred by 6 months of micrometeorite impacts. But the important thing was that it was intact. Life signs? Captain Torres demanded. Scanning. Yes, weak but present. I'm reading 31 individuals in the central section of the ship. Not all 47, Sarah realized. But 31 was far better than the 0 they had all feared. The rescue operation took 8 hours. The merchant vessel's life support systems had failed months ago, forcing the survivors to seal themselves into the ship's most protected compartments. They had been living on emergency rations and recycled air, slowly freezing as the ship's power systems failed one by one. When the last survivor was safely aboard the rescue ships, Captain Torres made his way to where Kex floated in the observation lounge. The young Zephyrian was staring out at the stars, his expression unreadable. 31 people are alive because of you, the captain said simply. Their families will see them again. Their children will grow up with parents. That's what your mathematics accomplished today. Kex nodded slowly. I only wish we could have found all 47. The other 16 died in the initial incident, Captain Torres explained gently. There was nothing anyone could have done for them. But those 31 would have been dead within another month if we hadn't found them. You gave them their lives back. When the rescue fleet returned to Kepler 442b, they found a crowd waiting at the spaceport. Word of the successful mission had spread throughout Zephyr City, carried by faster-than-light communication relays. For the first time in his life, Kex found himself the center of positive attention. Elder Zix waited at the center of the official delegation, his bioelectric field pulsing with what Sarah had learned to recognize as deep thought. The Council of Elders has reviewed the mission reports, he announced formally. The rescue operation was successful beyond our expectations. Does this mean you'll reconsider your policies regarding disabled Zephyrians? Sarah asked directly. Change comes slowly to our people. 6 months after the rescue mission, Zephyr City looked the same from the outside, but something fundamental had changed beneath its crystal surface. Small groups of young Zephyrians had begun gathering at ground level, discussing ideas that would have been unthinkable before Kex's success. They called themselves the Grounded, and their simple existence was causing major problems for the traditional power structure. Vera was the first to approach Kex directly. She was young, barely past her molting age, and her bioelectric organs functioned normally. She could fly as well as any Zephyrian, but she chose to walk. I want to understand, she said, settling onto the ground beside where Kex was working on his latest calculations.
How do you see patterns that we miss?
How does your mind work differently? Kex looked up from his datapad, surprised by the question. Most Zephyrians still avoided him, despite his recent fame. Those who did speak to him usually asked about the rescue mission or his mobility platform. No one had ever asked about how he thought. I am not certain I understand what you mean, he said carefully. The navigation problem you solved, Vera explained. I ran the same calculations through the Academy's best computers. They gave me the traditional search grid that failed to find the missing ship. But you saw something different. How? Kex considered the question. He had never really thought about his thinking process before. Perhaps it is because I have always had to find different paths, he said finally. When you can fly directly to any destination, you think in straight lines. When you must crawl around obstacles, you learn to see the spaces between things, the connections that are not obvious. Vera nodded thoughtfully. My flight instructor says that direct paths are always the most efficient. But you're saying that sometimes the indirect path reveals more information? Mathematics is full of elegant shortcuts that only become visible when you approach problems from unexpected angles, Kex said, warming to the subject. The same may be true for navigation or engineering, or any complex problem. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Guardian Thax, one of the older Zephyrians responsible for maintaining social order. His bioelectric field pulsed with authority as he floated above them, and his expression was stern. "Young Vera," he said formally, "your parents are concerned about your recent associations. This is not appropriate behavior for someone of your breeding." "I am learning about mathematics," Vera replied calmly. "How is education inappropriate?" "You are learning to debase yourself," Guardian Thax corrected. "The natural order exists for important reasons. When the elevated lower themselves to ground level, they disturb the harmony that has sustained our civilization for millennia." Kex began to gather his materials, preparing to leave before the confrontation escalated. He had no desire to cause trouble for Vera or anyone else who showed interest in his work, but Vera didn't move. "Guardian Thax, with respect, I have learned more about advanced mathematics in 3 conversations with Kex than I did in 2 years at the Academy. If that's debasing myself, then perhaps our definition of elevation needs to change." The Guardian's bioelectric field flickered with anger. "You speak of changes that could destroy everything our ancestors built. Do you want our children to crawl in the dirt like primitives? Do you want to abandon the gifts that evolution has given us?" "I want to use all the gifts evolution has given us," Vera replied, "including the gift of intelligence, which doesn't depend on the ability to fly." Similar conversations were happening throughout Zephyr City. The success of the rescue mission had created something that the ruling elders had not anticipated: hope. For the first time, young Zephyrians were questioning why their society was organized around flight ability. They were asking uncomfortable questions about other disabled members of their species, other outcasts who might have valuable contributions to make. The elders' response was swift and harsh. New regulations were announced limiting contact between different elevation classes. Ground-level areas were declared off-limits to flying Zephyrians except for official business. Public data terminals were relocated to heights that only flyers could reach, but the new rules only made the growing movement more determined. Young Zephyrians began meeting in secret, sharing copies of Kex's mathematical papers and discussing radical ideas about social equality. Some even experimented with ground-based mobility, walking instead of flying to demonstrate solidarity with the flightless. Sarah watched these developments with a mixture of hope and worry. Change was happening faster than she had expected, but it was also creating dangerous tensions. The traditional power structure was feeling threatened, and threatened authorities often responded with violence. Her concerns proved justified when the emergency session of the Council of Elders was called. "The situation has become intolerable," Elder Zix announced to the packed chamber. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by obvious agitation. "The natural order of our society is under attack from within, encouraged by outside influences that do not understand our ways." Elder Mora, the oldest member of the council, floated beside him with her bioelectric field pulsing in slow, deliberate patterns. "Our young people are abandoning the sky for the ground, rejecting millions of years of evolution in favor of alien philosophies. This madness must be stopped." "What exactly are you proposing?" asked Dr. Hassan, the current head of the Galactic Council Research Station. He had replaced Sarah's supervisor 3 months earlier, and he was far less sympathetic to social reform movements. "First, all contact between Galactic Council personnel and Zephyrian citizens will be strictly regulated," Elder Zix declared. "No off-worlder may interact with our people without official approval. Second," Elder Mora continued, "all artificial mobility devices will be confiscated and destroyed. The flightless will return to their traditional roles and locations. And third," Elder Zix finished, "the individual known as Kex will be permanently confined to the designated ground areas. His corrupting influence on our youth must be contained." Sarah, who had been listening from the visitors' gallery, stood up despite protocol. "You can't punish someone for the crime of being successful. Kex saved 31 lives. He's proven his value to the galactic community. He has proven his disruptive influence on our social stability," Elder Mora replied coldly. Some prices are too high to pay even for lives. Dr. Hassan looked uncomfortable with the entire situation. The Galactic Council had strict policies about interfering with local governments, but they also had commitments to protecting sentient rights. Perhaps we could reach a compromise, he suggested. Kex could be relocated to another world where his talents would be appreciated. No, Elder Zik said firmly. He is Zephyrian. He belongs here in his proper place. The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The elders had the power, and they intended to use it to restore what they saw as natural order. Sarah left the council chamber knowing that everything they had worked for was about to be destroyed. That evening, she found Kex in his family's dwelling, helping his younger sister with her mathematics homework. The girl was too young to understand the political storm swirling around her brother, but she clearly adored him. Sarah felt a sharp pang of guilt as she realized that their fight for equality might end up separating this family. They're going to ban your mobility platform, she told him directly, and they're going to restrict your movements to ground-level areas only. Kex nodded calmly as if he had been expecting this news. I knew this time would come. Change frightens people, especially those who benefit from the current system. We could get you off-world, Sarah offered. The Galactic Council would welcome someone with your abilities. You could have a real career, real opportunities. And abandon everyone else like me? Kex shook his head. No, if I run away, nothing changes. The next disabled Zephyrian will face the same isolation, the same prejudice. Someone has to stay and fight. They'll make your life miserable, Sarah warned. No access to research databases, no mobility platform, no contact with off-worlders. You'll be back where you started. Not exactly where I started, Kex said with a slight smile. I know things now that I didn't know before. I know that my mind has value, that my perspective can solve problems others cannot. They can take away my platform and my access to databases, but they cannot take away what I learned. Sarah felt tears threatening to fall. In 6 months, Kex had grown from an isolated, hopeless young alien into someone with unshakable confidence in his own worth. But that transformation was about to be tested in the harshest possible way. There's something else, she said reluctantly. Some of the young Zephyrians who have been meeting with you are facing punishment too. Their families are being pressured to send them for attitude correction. Vera has disappeared completely. Kex's calm expression finally cracked. They are being punished for association with me? The elders see them as infected with dangerous ideas, Sarah explained. Ideas about equality and inclusion that threaten the power structure. For the first time since she had known him, Kex looked truly defeated. He had been prepared to sacrifice his own freedom for his principles, but he had not anticipated that others would pay the price for his success. Perhaps I should accept exile, he said quietly. If my presence here brings suffering to others, don't you dare, Sarah said fiercely. Don't you dare. The solar storm warning came without any advance notice, transmitted across emergency frequencies at exactly 14:37 local time. Sarah was in her quarters, reviewing the restricted access protocols that would take effect the next day, when every communication device on the research station began screaming simultaneous alerts. All personnel to emergency stations. Dr. Hassan's voice echoed through the corridors. Class X solar flare detected. Estimated time to impact, 4 hours 23 minutes. Sarah dropped her datapad and ran for the command center. A Class X solar flare was the most powerful type of stellar radiation burst their sun could produce. The electromagnetic pulse would disable most electronic systems across the planet's surface, including the bioelectric organs that allowed Zephyrians to fly. The command center was chaos. Off-world staff ran between stations, coordinating with orbital satellites and deep space monitoring stations. The massive display screen showed a wall of charged particles racing toward Kepler 442b at nearly the speed of light. Estimated duration of electromagnetic interference? Dr. Hassan demanded. Minimum 6 hours, replied the duty officer. Possibly as long as 14 hours depending on secondary wave patterns. Ground all air traffic immediately. Get word to Zephyr City that they need to implement emergency protocols. Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. What emergency protocols? Their entire civilization is built around flight. They don't have ground-based transportation systems. Dr. Hassan paused, clearly realizing the same horrifying truth. Zephyrian cities were vertical structures designed for flying inhabitants. Food distribution, medical facilities, government services, Even private homes were all located on elevated platforms. When the solar storm hit, an entire civilization would suddenly find itself stranded wherever they happened to be. Contact Elder Zix immediately, Dr. Hassan ordered. They need to begin emergency evacuations to ground-level facilities. Sir, the communications officer said hesitantly, there are no ground-level facilities. The only structures at ground level are maintenance areas and... He paused, consulting his cultural database. Areas designated for the flightless. The terrible scope of the disaster was becoming clear when the electromagnetic pulse hit. Millions of Zephyrians would be trapped on high platforms with no way to reach food, water, or medical care. The areas that could shelter them were controlled by the same social outcasts that the government had just finished marginalizing. Get me Kex, Sarah said suddenly. Dr. Hassan stared at her. The Zephyrian authorities just banned contact with him yesterday. We can't afford not to, Sarah interrupted. He's the only person on this planet who knows how to navigate ground-level areas efficiently. And more importantly, he's the only one who understands the infrastructure that the flightless have built to survive. While Dr. Hassan wrestled with the political implications, Sarah was already moving. The new contact restrictions wouldn't take effect until tomorrow, which gave her a few hours of legal flexibility. She grabbed an emergency communication unit and headed for the transport bay. She found Kex in the workshop behind his family's dwelling, working on mechanical devices by hand. His mobility platform sat in the corner, its repulsors already disabled by order of the Zephyrian authorities. He looked up as Sarah approached, his expression carefully neutral. Dr. Chen, I did not expect to see you again so soon. There's no time for proper protocol, Sarah said, quickly explaining the situation. When that solar storm hits, your entire civilization is going to be grounded, literally. Kex listened carefully, his mathematical mind already working through the implications. The elevated platforms hold approximately 3 million Zephyrians at any given time, he said slowly. Ground-level facilities can shelter perhaps 50,000. What about the areas where the flightless live? We have tunnels, underground chambers, reinforced ground-level buildings. Maybe space for another 100,000 if we crowd together. Kex paused, realization dawning. The rest will be trapped on platforms with no access to food or water. Can you help coordinate evacuations? The government will have to work with the flightless communities whether they like it or not. Kex was quiet for a long moment, staring at his disabled mobility platform. 2 days ago, the Council of Elders declared me a corrupting influence who needed to be contained. Today, you ask me to save the same people who voted to restrict my freedom. I'm asking you to save innocent people who had nothing to do with those political decisions, Sarah said gently. Including children, elderly, disabled Zephyrians who are just as trapped by the system as you are. And if I refuse? If I say that they created this situation through their own prejudice and short-sightedness? Sarah met his eyes steadily. Then you wouldn't be the person I thought you were. The person who spent 2 years working to save strangers on a lost ship. Kex smiled sadly. You know exactly what to say to make me do the right thing. Is that a yes? That is a yes. But I will need my platform restored and I will need official authority to coordinate with ground-level communities. The other flightless will not trust orders that come through traditional Zephyrian channels. The emergency meeting in the council chamber was unlike anything in Zephyrian history. Elder Zix floated at the center of the room, his bioelectric field flickering with stress. Around him, other elders discussed evacuation plans that everyone knew were impossible to implement. The agricultural platforms alone hold 500,000 workers, Elder Mora was saying. Even if we begin immediate evacuations, we cannot move them all before the storm hits. The transport systems are completely dependent on bioelectric power, added Elder Vex. When the electromagnetic pulse arrives, they will cease to function. Dr. Hassan and Sarah entered the chamber together, followed by Kex on his restored mobility platform. The sight of the crawler in the council chamber caused an immediate uproar. This is highly irregular, Elder Zix protested. The individual is banned from elevated areas. The individual has a name, Sarah said firmly. And right now, he's your best hope for preventing a humanitarian disaster. Kex floated forward, his platform putting him at the same level as the council members for the first time in his life. Honored elders, he said formally. I offer my assistance in coordinating ground-level evacuations. We do not need assistance from a... Elder Mora began, but Elder Zix cut her off. Explain your proposal, he said wearily. Kex activated a holographic display showing the underground tunnel network that connected flightless communities throughout Zephyr City. These passages can shelter approximately 100,000 people in emergency conditions. Additionally, there are reinforced ground structures that can hold another 50,000. That still leaves nearly 3 million people trapped, Elder Vex pointed out. No, Kex replied, manipulating the display to show additional areas. It leaves 3 million people who need to learn, very quickly, how to move efficiently at ground level. The flightless communities have developed techniques for rapid ground-based transportation. We can teach these methods to the elevated population. Elder Mora's bioelectric field pulsed with outrage. You suggest that our people crawl through dirt like animals? I suggest that your people survive, Kex replied calmly. Pride is a luxury you cannot afford for the next 12 hours. The storm hit exactly when predicted, and its effects were even worse than anticipated. The electromagnetic pulse that swept across Kepler 442b disabled every bioelectric organ on the planet simultaneously. In an instant, an entire flying civilization was brought to Earth. The first few hours were chaos. Zephyrians trapped on high platforms panicked as they realized they could not reach food, water, or medical facilities. Some attempted to climb down from extreme heights, resulting in serious injuries. Others simply waited, hoping that their bioelectric organs would recover quickly. But Kex was ready. Working with the hastily assembled Emergency Coordination Center, he deployed teams of flightless Zephyrians throughout the city. They carried rope, emergency supplies, and most importantly, knowledge of how to move efficiently without flight. The same people who had been treated as social outcasts became essential first responders. Sarah watched from the research station as Kex coordinated the massive operation. His mathematical mind proved invaluable for logistics, calculating optimal distribution routes, predicting resource requirements, and organizing the complex task of feeding and sheltering millions of displaced people. Platform 7 Delta needs medical supplies, came one report over the communication network. Team 12 is responding, Kex replied, updating his coordination display. Estimated arrival time 43 minutes using the North Tunnel approach. We have structural damage on Platform 15 Alpha. Evacuation required. Team 6 has rope and climbing equipment in that sector. Diverting them now. Hour after hour, Kex and his teams worked to keep the grounded civilization functioning. The irony was not lost on anyone. The people who had been considered useless burdens were now literally carrying their society on their backs. Elder Zix found himself on a supply distribution platform, watching Vera and 3 other young Zephyrians work alongside former,